Something unusual happens when a person decides to stop reacting. The noise fades. The whispers lose their power, and suddenly, the same people who once watched, judged, or criticized begin to fall silent. Have you ever noticed how quickly the atmosphere changes when you simply refuse to play the game anymore? For a long time, many people move through life trying to explain themselves. They answer every accusation. They defend every decision. They try to prove their intentions again and again, hoping that eventually the misunderstandings will disappear. But strangely, the more someone explains, the more others seem to question. Why does this happen? Because attention feeds the cycle. Every reaction gives the conversation more life. Every defense invites another argument. And slowly, without realizing it, a person becomes trapped in a loop where their energy is constantly pulled toward noise that never truly ends. But then something shifts. One day, the person stops responding the way they used to. They stop explaining every move. They stop trying to convince people who already decided what they want to believe. They step back, breathe, and focus their attention somewhere else. And that is when everything changes. At first, people notice the silence. It feels unusual. The same person who once answered quickly now says very little. The one who once tried to clear every misunderstanding now allows things to pass without comment. And those who were used to reactions suddenly find themselves speaking into an empty space. Why does silence create such a powerful shift? Because silence removes the fuel. When there is no reaction, the performance loses its audience. When there is no argument, the tension has nowhere to grow. And when there is no emotional response, the entire dynamic begins to collapse. Think about it for a moment. How many conflicts in life continue simply because both sides keep responding? One comment leads to another. One assumption leads to another defense. One criticism leads to another explanation. The cycle repeats itself endlessly. But the moment someone steps out of that cycle, the pattern breaks. This is not about arrogance or ignoring people. It is about understanding where your attention belongs. Not every opinion deserves a response. Not every misunderstanding needs a correction, and not every voice deserves the power to disturb your inner stability. There is a quiet strength in restraint. The ability to pause, instead of reacting immediately, shows a level of self-control that many people struggle to reach. It signals that your focus is no longer tied to every passing judgment. And this is often the moment when observers begin to grow quiet. Some fall silent because they realize their words no longer provoke the reaction they expected. Others grow quiet because they begin to question their own assumptions. And a few simply lose interest once the emotional drama disappears. The silence you create becomes a mirror. It reveals who was seeking understanding and who was only seeking reaction. But here is the deeper question. What happens within you when you choose silence over reaction? What changes inside your mind when you stop chasing every external opinion? The answer may be more powerful than most people realize. When a person begins to step back from constant reactions, something subtle but powerful begins to take shape inside them. At first, it feels unfamiliar. The habit of responding, explaining, and defending has often been built over many years. So when that pattern is broken, there is a moment of adjustment. A moment where the mind asks, should I say something? Should I correct them? Should I respond? But slowly, a different realization begins to grow. Not every voice deserves access to your energy. For a long time, many people unknowingly allow their attention to be directed by others. A comment appears, and the mind immediately reacts. A criticism is spoken, and the heart begins to race. An accusation surfaces, and suddenly the entire day becomes focused on proving something that may not even matter. Have you ever experienced that feeling? The sense that your peace has been taken away by words that should never have had that much power in the first place. When someone finally chooses silence, they begin to take that power back. Silence creates distance between stimulus and response. It gives the mind space to observe rather than immediately react. Instead of becoming entangled in every conversation, a person begins to see the patterns behind those conversations. And once those patterns become visible, many things start to make sense. Some people criticize because they misunderstand. Some speak out of frustration. Others are simply repeating opinions they heard elsewhere. And there are also those who provoke reactions intentionally, because reaction is the very thing they seek. But when reactions disappear, the situation changes. The person who once tried to provoke may suddenly become uncomfortable. The one who expected an argument now finds none. The individual who assumed they had influence realizes that their words are no longer steering the emotional state of another person. This is where silence becomes more than just quietness. It becomes clarity. Instead of spending energy proving your worth to everyone around you, your focus begins to shift toward growth, discipline, and purpose. The mind becomes calmer. Decisions become more thoughtful, and slowly, the emotional storms that once surrounded you begin to lose their intensity. Interestingly, this transformation is often misunderstood. Some people interpret silence as weakness. They assume that if someone is not responding, it means they have nothing to say. But those who truly understand know that restraint requires far more strength than reaction. Anyone can react in the heat of the moment. Anyone can respond instantly when emotions are stirred. But it takes a deeper level of control to pause, observe, and decide whether something truly deserves your attention. And when that control becomes part of your character, something remarkable happens. Your presence begins to change. People start noticing that you are no longer easily pulled into conflict. Your responses become fewer, but more meaningful. Your words carry more weight because they are not scattered in every direction. And slowly, without any announcement, the atmosphere around you shifts. Those who once filled the air with noise begin to speak less. Conversations that once pulled you in now pass quietly by. The same voices that once tried to disturb your peace suddenly realize that their influence has faded. And this raises another question. If silence can transform the way others interact with you, what else might it begin to transform within your own life? As silence becomes a habit rather than a reaction, a deeper transformation begins to unfold. At first, it feels like you are simply avoiding unnecessary conflicts. But over time, you realize that something much greater is happening. Your awareness starts to sharpen. You begin to see people, situations, and conversations with a clarity that was once hidden behind constant emotional noise. When you were reacting to everything, your attention was scattered. Every opinion demanded a response. Every misunderstanding felt like a problem that had to be fixed immediately. But now, with silence creating space around you, the mind starts to observe instead of rushing forward. And observation changes everything. You begin to notice who speaks with sincerity and who speaks only to provoke. You see who truly wishes to understand and who simply wants attention. You start recognizing patterns in behavior that once went unnoticed because you were too busy defending yourself. Have you ever stepped back from a situation and suddenly realized how obvious the pattern was all along? This is one of the hidden powers of restraint. When you are no longer reacting automatically, your perspective widens. Instead of being inside the storm, you are now watching it from a distance. And from that distance, many things become clear. You realize that some people were never truly interested in the truth. Their goal was the reaction itself. Others were repeating stories, assumptions, or judgments without ever taking the time to understand the full picture. And a few may have been testing your patience simply to see how far they could push your limits. But when silence replaces reaction, those tests stop working. The person expecting an emotional response receives none. The one hoping to create tension finds only calm. And the voices that once seemed loud begin to fade, because their echo has nothing to bounce against. It is almost like watching a fire lose its fuel. Without the oxygen of reaction, the flames slowly weaken. What makes this shift even more powerful is what happens within you during this process. The energy that once went into defending your reputation now begins to move toward something far more valuable. Self-mastery. When you stop reacting to every external voice, you start listening more closely to your own thoughts. You begin asking deeper questions. Where should your time truly go? Which goals actually deserve your focus? Which relationships bring growth instead of chaos? This kind of reflection changes the direction of a person's life. Instead of constantly proving yourself to others, you begin building something meaningful for yourself. Your actions become quieter, but more intentional. Your focus becomes sharper, and the sense of inner stability grows stronger with time. Ironically, the more stable you become, the more noticeable your silence becomes to others. Some people begin to respect it. They sense that your calmness is not emptiness, but control. Others may feel confused because the version of you they once knew is no longer responding in the same predictable way. And then there are those who simply fall silent. Not because you forced them to, not because you argued them into submission, but because your refusal to engage removed the stage they once stood on. But this leads to an even deeper realization. Silence is not just a shield against noise. It can also become a doorway to something far greater than most people expect. When silence becomes part of your character, it begins to shape the way you move through the world. What started as a simple decision not to react eventually turns into something deeper. It becomes discipline. It becomes awareness. And most importantly, it becomes freedom. Freedom from the constant pressure to prove yourself. Many people spend years trying to control how others see them. They adjust their words, defend their choices, and explain their intentions over and over again. But the truth is simple and often difficult to accept. No amount of explanation can fully control the opinions of others. Some people will misunderstand you no matter how clearly you speak. Others will judge based on fragments of information, and a few will hold on to their assumptions simply because changing their view would require humility. Once you understand this, something inside you relaxes. You realize that your peace does not need to depend on universal approval. Your direction does not need to be negotiated with every outside voice. And suddenly, silence no longer feels like holding back. It feels like choosing wisely where your energy belongs. This is where the real shift happens. Instead of reacting to every distraction, your focus begins to settle on what truly matters. Your work becomes more intentional. Your thoughts become more organized. Your emotions become steadier because they are no longer pulled in 10 different directions by every passing opinion. Have you ever noticed how powerful calmness can be in a chaotic environment? When everyone else is rushing to speak, the quiet person often sees more clearly. While others are busy reacting, The observer is understanding the situation from a wider perspective. And when the moment finally comes to speak, their words carry far more meaning because they were not wasted earlier. This is why silence often leads to respect. Not the loud kind of recognition that demands attention, but a quieter form of acknowledgement. People begin to notice that you are not easily shaken. Your responses are thoughtful rather than impulsive. Your presence feels steady even when the environment around you becomes uncertain. And interestingly, the same voices that once filled the space with criticism or noise often become quieter over time. Some fall silent because they realize their influence has faded. Others fall silent because they begin to respect the boundaries you created without ever announcing them. And a few simply move on once they understand that your attention is no longer available for every unnecessary exchange. But perhaps the most important silence is the one that grows within you. It is the calm space where reflection becomes possible, the place where your mind is no longer crowded with endless arguments and imagined responses. In that quiet space, clarity begins to emerge. You begin to see your path more clearly. Your priorities become easier to identify. Your decisions become less influenced by outside pressure and more aligned with your values. And in that moment, you realize something powerful. The silence that once seemed like a small change in behavior has quietly transformed the way you live. Because sometimes the strongest move a person can make is not speaking louder than everyone else. Sometimes the strongest move is simply choosing when not to speak at all. Over time, something even more interesting begins to happen. The silence that once protected your peace starts shaping the way others perceive you. People begin to notice that you are not easily pulled into unnecessary conversations, not easily shaken by criticism, and not easily distracted by noise. And when people notice that kind of stability, their behavior often changes without you asking for it. Why does this happen? Because human nature tends to test boundaries until it finds resistance. When someone reacts to every comment, others quickly learn that provoking a response is easy. But when someone responds thoughtfully and speaks only when necessary, the dynamic shifts. Suddenly, every word carries more weight. Think about it. When a person talks constantly, their words start to blend together. But when a person speaks rarely and with intention, people begin to listen more carefully. Silence turns your voice into something valuable instead of something common. But the real transformation is not just external. The real transformation happens inside your own mind. When you stop reacting to every distraction, you gain something that many people struggle to develop: mental clarity. Your thoughts become less crowded. Your focus becomes sharper. The energy that once went into defending yourself now flows into building your future. Have you ever noticed how much time is lost in arguments that lead nowhere? Hours of discussion, messages, explanations, and emotional tension, yet nothing truly changes. The same opinions remain. The same misunderstandings repeat. Now imagine redirecting that energy somewhere meaningful. Instead of proving yourself to those who doubt you, you invest in improving yourself. Instead of chasing approval, you build discipline. Instead of reacting to noise, you move quietly toward your goals. And this quiet progress often surprises people. Those who once spoke the loudest sometimes become the most silent when they realize you are no longer playing the same game. The conversations they expected never happen. The reactions they predicted never appear. And slowly, their attention moves elsewhere. Not because you forced them away, but because your silence changed the entire atmosphere. There is also another layer to this realization. Silence teaches patience. It reminds you that not every moment requires immediate action. Sometimes the wisest response is to observe, learn, and wait for the right moment. This patience strengthens your character in ways that constant reaction never could. It allows you to make decisions based on reflection rather than impulse. It allows you to choose your battles carefully instead of fighting every minor conflict. And when someone develops that level of control, their presence naturally becomes stronger. People may not always understand why they respect you more, but they sense the difference. They sense that your calmness is intentional, your restraint is deliberate, your focus is not easily disturbed. But perhaps the most powerful lesson silence teaches is this: you do not need to win every argument to move forward in life. You do not need to correct every misunderstanding to remain confident in your direction. And you do not need the approval of every voice around you to know where you are going. Sometimes the greatest progress happens quietly, without announcements, without arguments, and without explanations. And often, by the time others finally notice the change in you, the noise that once surrounded you has already disappeared.